So before we go into the sort of crux of the theoretical and historical questions covered in the book and start our lecture and discussion, I wanted to talk about the geography first and the history of the place that Kotkin in his Magnetic Mountain is telling. So the okay. So do you see Magnitogorsk? Yeah, here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. In fact, it's not that far from us. So I've driven a lot through this part of Russia, through the Chelyabinsk region. So it's from Astana to Kostanay, it's 700 kilometers, and then it's actually closer from Kostanay to Magnitogorsk than from Astana to Kostanay. It's only 400 kilometers. So it's really close to us. It's a frontier with the steppe, and it is sort of at the located on the other side of Ural range, right? And Ural, it's sort of a very conventional, the Ural range and the Ural River, it's a conventional division starting from the 18th century into Europe and Asia, right? I want to emphasize, it's very conventional. Actually, Eurasia is one continent, yeah, but there is this sort of imagination of there being Asia and there being Europe, right? So Ural range is sort of considered to be sort of the border, of course, imaginary border between Asia and Europe. And Ural is located, how to say in English, Yeteginde, like at the у подножия Уральских гор, at the foot of Ural mountains, and it's also on the river Ural, right? So, and Ural River is also close to us because then you see how it flows? Like it starts in Verkhnyuralsk and it flows through Magnitogorsk, then Orsk, then Orenburg, and then it comes to Ural, and then it flows into the Caspian Sea. As we learned from the school, Volga и Урал впадают в Каспийское море. Yeah, now it's really, there are problems, current ecological problems with the Ural River, sort of downstream because there is not enough water. And part of it is also the industrialization that went on in the Chelyabinsk region. So it's really close to us, and it has been Magnitogorsk sort of as a first and one of the first, as one of the very symbolic so-called mono-towns, right? Monogorодов, industrial towns. The towns that were built not as a place of trade, as a place of convenient location, but as cities, towns that were built for, because of the industrial logic, right? And in Kazakhstan, we have many such monotowns. So what we are reading about Magnitogorsk is really sort of concerns us directly. We have our own Temirtau, which is our Kazakhstan, Kazakh Magnitogorsk. We have the city that's near Temirtau, Karaganda, which was, and the coal from Karaganda was actually used for furnaces in Magnitogorsk. So one of the problems, as you read through the books, that there was a iron ore in Magnitogorsk, but there was no coking coal, right, that was needed. So the coking coal needed to be brought either from Kuzbas or then later from Kazakhstan. it was brought. So there is this frontier logic to Magnitogorsk, what Kotkin, I think, uses the word internal colonization, right? When the country turns inside, right? Or to its own frontier in terms of developing this frontier. But, and Kotkin mentions that Magnitogorsk, that the city of magnetic town was built at the top of Ural range, but it also was built in the place of the Cossack station. So, and so I want to maybe bring your attention to what was here before, because oftentimes in the ideology of these monotowns and in the sort of narratives of how industrialization went and sort of proceeded, there is also, you know, we start from the scratch, right? People came to an empty land, there was nobody there, it was like very wild, difficult conditions in the steppe or somewhere, and they built something, right? The sort of the heroic narrative of building socialism or building cities and so on. But of course, that's not the case, right? And particularly in the case of Magnitogorsk and this region, it has been a frontier region, and along this Ural River, they have for 2 centuries almost, there were это Уральско-Уйская линия укреплений, the Ural and Uy, the Ural River, and then there is a Uy River, which is Troitsk is not shown here, but Troitsk was the major point of sort of caravan trade with the steppe up to the end of the 19th century. And then even like the railroad was built, there was a to build railroad to the Troitsk, and then railroad went to even Petropavlovsk, right? And then they talk about that, but there was no railroad to Magnitogorsk, right? So this railroad, that sort of Transsibirskaya magistral that went through Petropavlovsk, there was a railroad like the Stanция Kartaly, right? Which is near the, very near to the Kazakh border. And they are building a new railroad in order to open up this magnetic mountain city, and in order to bring coal and construction materials and everything to Magnitogorsk. So people lived along the Ural River, and actually we can say that powerful people lived along the Ural River because they were the estate of Cossacks, right? The people who were charged with defending the frontier against the, you know, people like Kazakhs, Kazakh, not so Cossacks were charged with defending frontier against Kazakhs. And they were powerful people and a powerful state in the sense that they were armed, right? So these were the people who were allowed to bear arms in the Russian Empire. Not many people were allowed to bear arms. They were people who were like riders, like they were riding horses, and they were also like had their own land. So these people lived a good life. In the sense they were allowed to bear arms, they had their own land, which partly, of course, one could say was taken. And what happened to them with the end, and of course there was like opening up of the Urals to the peasants and so on. And there was also small scale, and one could say small industrial scale of building factories in the Ural. So the Soviet Union did not, like, there was a long history of building so-called zavody, right? Also like for the iron ore, for other ores that was found in the Urals and were in abundance. So there was a long history. Of course, it was not on the scale of Magnitogorsk. It was not producing like millions of puts of iron, what's called chugun in English.
Iron pig.
Iron pig, yeah, iron pig. But there were these small-scale sort of factories that were functioning at these places previously. So it was not like completely from scratch. And even the Cossacks, they had this like previous and, you know, other like the history of the development of Urals, like Demidov and so on, says that there was this well, it was not a, was it a light industry as opposed to heavy industry, Logan? The scale, of course, of that factories was smaller, and they depended on, for instance, they had to be on the river because they depended on water mills, right, in the absence of electricity and so on. But even Magnitogorsk, it had to build a dam in order to build an electric station and then power all of this, right? So the logic of using the rivers as building factories like for turning ore into iron pig and so on, there was this logic previously, so it was not like completely new, but of course the scale was new, and the concentration and the bringing of the peasants into these places, while previously it was just, you know, like Demidov serfs, like крепостные that worked, that were made into workers, or so-called отходники, like seasonal workers, like the peasants who do their seasonal labor in the villages, but sometimes they become, in the winter, they go to these factories and work. So it was not like, the logic of this industrial development was not like completely new. And as I said, there were like very powerful people who lived there, who of course, like by that time had to be declassified, how to say, dekozokified, they had to be annihilated as a class, the Cossacks. And I oftentimes tell that Kazakhs in Kazakhstan, like in the current Kazakhstan, throughout their history, they were actually benefactors of the two genocides. Well, I don't know if it could be called genocide, but like the annihilation of Dzungars by the Chinese, and then annihilation of the Cossacks as a class, right? And in this sense, sort of the Cossacks were, unlike Kazakhs, who as an ethnos sort of, for whom like all of this revolution was an opportunity, right, to develop their autonomy, Of course, for Cossacks, it was like they were for the Tsar, right, because they've connected their lives and they used to defend the Tsar, so they kind of made a wrong, like most of them, wrong historical choice, one could say. And as a result of it, they were annihilated as a class, yeah, which then many of them actually ended up working in these factories in a different capacity. So when we think of where the people came, and Kotkin writes about it, right, that it's in the middle of, it's, I think he calls it sort of the Russian land surrounded by all of these other people, right, Tatars and Kazakhs and Bashkirs. And currently, Magnitogorsk is just 35 kilometers from the border of Bashkortostan, right? So you cross Ural Mountains, and starting from the Ural Mountains, you have this Bashkortostan land, starting from the lakes of Abzakova and others. So this is sort of prehistory, right? That this was not an empty land on which the construction of magnetic mountain and magnetic city had started. And also post-history, I think, is important, because today Magnitogorsk is one of the largest mono cities in Russia, and it's still working, right? And but I guess the most important post-history is not, this is a road through the Ural Mountains. Okay, I have to get back to Magnitogorsk. This is Ufa, so this is Magnitogorsk. And this is the current monument. And the name of the monument is called At Fronta Tylu, from the, what's Tyl in English? The rear, sort of this hinterland, like the importance of the hinterland during the war, right? And that's of paramount importance, of course. Like, it's not in the book. Like in the book, we talk about all of this disorder and the 30s and Stalinism, but it is of paramount importance that during the war, there was this factory, like that was producing pig iron, that was producing steel. And as like, if you go to Magnitogorsk, and the citizens would say, like, why it's an important part of now the history or the narrative of the city now. They would say that every second tank during the World War II, like on the Soviet side, was made from this iron pig. I think every second tank and like the and other, of course, weaponry, including planes, including artillery. So the fact that it was built, it kind of, while the west of the country was, you know, occupied, and Dnipropetrovsk and all of the other, like, of no use to the Soviets. And for the war like this, the Urals was actually, and the fact that there was such a large scale factory producing all of this steel and so on for the war, it was of paramount importance. So that's also the kind of the after history, right? Of the, and it continued to be important in the okay, I also wanted to show so this is the district that mentioned in the book. It's called Berezki, where Americans lived in the 30s, and it's on the left side, on the side of the, you know, like how the city, there was a long sort of indecision on where to build the city on the I'm always confused with the right bank and left bank, because the right bank is the west and the left bank is the east, which kind of does not make sense, but it makes sense because the right and left is when you have to look sort of where the river is flowing, right? And then decide. So it's built on the left bank, on the east side of the river, close to the factory. And now, of course, it's in this dilapidated kind of, it used to be a very prestigious place where first Americans lived, and then the management of the factory lived and so on. But now, because of its proximity to the factory, it's sort of dilapidated and not very prestigious place. So this is the still like the people work and sort of the narrative of this hard labor. It's still kind of of course, transformed somewhat in the post-Soviet situation, but it's still there. And the hills, I also had somewhere the hills where, so this is the statue of Lenin in front of this is, you can see the scale of this monument from hinterland to the front lines at Attila Frontu. Okay, maybe later I will also send you the actual sites of the factory and the hills near the factory, which were problematic for May when he was planning to build the city. So this sort of prehistory and after history that I wanted to share with you. And of course, like in the post-Soviet period, Magnitogorsk, as well as with deindustrialization and other processes happening, of course, it has been transformed, let's say. There is no longer this sort of, yes, there is still this heroic narrative of the cities that was at Frontatillo, that helped, that was sort of central in sort of the hinterland's effort to build the weapons, build the armory, but of course it's less and less there. And also I wanted to, but the city is functioning. It's not, I guess, the most ecological city, and of course, like the factory creates, people recognize all of these ecological problems. But as in the late Soviet Union, it was and we can talk about it when we talk about the squeezing of peasants into the city and making workers and Soviet citizens out of peasants, the issue of like sort of peasant habits, right? And one of the, I guess, recognition of these peasant habits and the desire of people to have the land and work on the land despite of their proletariat credentials and proletariat sort of narratives that dominates this book is the practice of this huge industrial complex, Metallurgiczego Zavoda, the factory, to give out land for private dachas. So now along Ural, like starting from the late Soviet period, like they had this, many workers of the factory received these private dachas. Like first, like just a patch of land on which then they build and grow and vegetables and so on. And the river, of course, along Ural, it's, I mean, the land is very rich. So actually you can grow a lot on this land. And not only get iron out of it. Okay, now I'll stop sharing. And we'll talk about the book. First, about the sort of theoretical part that Kotkin, the book was written in 1995. So it was one of the first books and one of the sort of the most powerful books that represented this social history turn, right? And social history, as opposed to the previous history when you write about like tsars, like what happened to the leaders, like it's kind of the like if you read the, I know, any history, the history of Russian Empire, you have to start with the tsars, like Ivan the Terrible, Boris Godunov, like Peter the Great, and it's a succession of leaders, right? Nowadays we lots of attention is paid to the Golden Horde, right? And the Golden Horde is again the succession of Khans, right? Like this Khan, Batu Khans, and Birkes, and Uzbeks, and Janibek, and all of these people. But social history is kind of getting away from this history at the sort of level of the leaders, at the level of the tsars and Khans and so on, and getting to a every day, right? And also small places, and the places that far away, that are not Moscow, that are not St. Petersburg, right? But there are places somewhere in Siberia or in the Urals, like Magnitogorsk. And you write the history of this place in a certain period, right? And the history of everyday life in the cities, the history on the street level, right? How the street was built and such. So this is a social history turn. And it coincided with this sort of view of new approach to the Soviet history in the West called revisionism. And Caroline Humphrey, she already writes in this vein of revisionism, right? She sort of, if previously the Soviet Union was described only through it, like as a totalitarian state, which where there is ideology, official pronouncement, and people are just, I don't know, kind of automatons that follow the pronouncement of the party. They're either completely sort of submitted or in complete subjugation to the party and totalitarian state, or they are protesting and trying to flee, and dissidents and so on. So all of these kind of people fit into this totalitarian model. And people like Caroline Humphrey, but also people like Sheila Fitzpatrick, who is mentioned in the introduction, they sort of introduce this new, what's called revisionist approach to the Soviet history, which kind of, okay, let's look how it worked. Let's not think of like kind of ideology and real life of the people as, you know, double life, right? That people live one life on the official level and a separate life on the private level. Let's see how this ideological ideology of the state permeated the everyday life. So that's why it's called oftentimes, like they're called sort of revisionist, or even kind of explaining away the Stalinism, or like taking the blame away from the party. Especially Sheila Fitzpatrick is often accused of kind of everyday Stalinism, explaining like who wrote like 40 million letters of accusations, right? How people kind of lived ordinary life in, I think I'm citing ordinary life in extraordinary time, right? To I think I'm citing Sheila Fitzpatrick. It's a quote from her. So this book is also about everyday Stalinism, right? How it contains both the ideological level, and I think in the book he also in the beginning has this, you know, all of this structure of the party, of the state pyramid, he calls it, legislative and executive, government and bureaucracy, Supreme Court, Communist Party. So his data is coming both from the official level, like this high state, high level documents, Pятилетка, 5-year plans, pronouncements at the party meetings, what we call CS forums, party forums, like the 14th, starting with from the 14th party forum in which industrialization was announced, right, to the following party forums in which all of this, like the Пятилетkas was announced, in which the delivery of the plans were reported and new plans were elaborated. It's this sort of organs of bureaucracy and party organs, but also he looks at what happened at the like small scale, like party organizations, right? Like the Komsomol meetings, which are like at the lowest level, right? At the sort of, as we would call today, grassroots level, right? Grassroots level politics, right? When a recruiter goes to the village and to call people to come and live in Magnitogorsk. Or he looks also at how people spoke Bolshevik, right? And how people appropriated this language and spoke in this language through like writing letters, writing complaints, and so on, writing autobiographies of how, and autobiography also emerges as a sort of particular epistola, not a particular genre, right, of writing about oneself, how one became a we were looking for the word udarnik last year, shock worker, right? He uses this new translation, which Caroline Humphrey did not use for udarnik truda, shock worker. So there are lots of data, right, that he can use, which contains both kind of ideological pronouncements, right, of how things should be, the plan and so on, but also there is some reality, right, that's getting through like this at these grassroots root level meetings, at the complaints that people are writing, at the letters that they're writing to Magnitogorski рабочий, Челябинский рабочий, the newspapers, and all of these like court proceedings in which people sometimes also tell, like, which has the like maybe not complete their like what they thought, but some sort of grain of truth, right, of what they thought of the situation. So there is this rich data that he uses, and he of course oscillates, right, sometimes between the plan and the implementation, the official and the sort of what would be the opposite of the official, the everyday and
actual will be good.
What?
Actual word. Yeah.
Actual, there is a word in English, I'm blanking on it, which is about the routine, the everyday and so on. And also between the order, like the order is created, right? The huge things are created, and the chaos, right? Which mundane, Ali, thank you. Yes, mundane. The official and the mundane, right? The sort of the high level pronouncements, the high level ideology, and the mundane, sort of everyday. Sort of this oscillation between the plan and the implementation, order that's imagined and that is being created, but also chaos that's around, and how things are supposed to be and supposed to work, and how they're not working. And here, of course, we're dealing with the like idea of the socialism and the planned economy, and how it's, and we're going to talk about it. Now we are going to through the list of questions that I sent for the discussion, and we'll talk about each of them. And the plan, yes, and the plan is something. It's great to have plans, right? Plans sort of give order to our lives, right? Even our personal lives, we try to plan. And even like when we plan for our individual lives, we fail oftentimes, right? With our plans of, or I don't know, I often, even in my work, we write plans like what I'm supposed to achieve in 3 years. And then I write the report of what I have actually achieved, and there is always this mismatch, right? Even with my own individual. And here you plan these huge things, right? And I think it's important to that Magnetic Mountain, and later Paul Stronsky's book, and even in nowadays, like it's important to note how sort of these big plans come into life, right? And the mechanisms and the ideology, and how to make people believe, and how to make people work. And it was important then, like as he, I think, mentioned, that communists in Moscow, they were not sorcerers, right? They could not like as it says in Quran, kun wa yakun, like be, let it be and it appears. No, of course they're not sorcerers. Like it has to, it's a huge like concentration and mobilization and people's labor of thousands of people that made it possible, right, to appear. And how it is possible, right? Because it's not easy, like, and we have to learn how to talk about it without over ideologizing, right? And even like currently when we talk about Astana, it's not like, and it's also oftentimes we talk about Nazarbayev came and said, let it be, and it appeared. Of course not. Like, it's not just Nazarbayev, he's not a sorcerer, he's not a magician, right? So maybe it's useful exercise to see how certain plans and certain pronouncements are delivered at the grassroots level, right? And how they work. So this is one of the sort of takes away from the book. I'm already talking too much, but I have to talk more, I think. So let's talk about similarities between Western and Soviet modernity projects, and in what important way Soviet modernity was rooted in Western modernity. And this is an important theoretical argument of this book, that sort of Soviet modernity was not some sort of Western or sort of Oriental despotism and some sort of, it was very much rooted in overall Western modernity. And last class we talked about, remember what I talked about sort of in division of labor, right, and industrialization of agriculture. And I talked about Adam Smith and how industrial modernity is connected with the division of labor. But what happens towards the end of the 19th century, it's sort of industrial modernity, it becomes this, you know, coal, steel, all of this concentration of labor, huge factories, right? And it's not only in the Soviet Union, it's also like in where they hire engineers from Chicago, right? From what was the name of the company of these engineers who produced steel in these factories in the US, right? And I want to make a parallel with, I don't know if you've read Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. It's a very anti-communist kind of ideological novel about heroes, like who are producers and so on. But look at the people who are sort of the heroes in her book, right? And Ayn Rand herself was an immigrant from Russia, right? Who came to the US and kind of who espoused like this communism and socialism and the way they built it. But her own novel, it's kind of like, you know, this order, like this kind of praise of this high industrial modernity, because all of the heroes, like from like the woman, the character Magnitogorsk, she's like a representative of, you know, like of her father is a railroad magnate, right? And there is this guy, Hank Rearden, who is a steel magnate, but who also like came to be magnate from being a simple common person, a common worker, and he invented a certain alloy, splash of steel, which is very useful for the railroads. And this is Rearden Medal, Taggart, Transcontinental Railroad, steel, coal, all of these people who are heroes in Atlas Shrugged, they're all producers, either of steel, railroad functionaries, or, you know, coal, or the scientists. And then there are parasites, like people who are like, you know, Hank Rearden's wife, who had the charity, and the brother who also had another charity, and all of these people in the bureaucracy who are parasites, who are not producing anything, but sort of siphoning the wealth that's created by this high modernist producers, right, of steel, iron, you know, and other things. So this kind of idea of industrialization and high modernism, it's a common idea, and of making people who are, you know, who are these producers. Like if heroes of Ayn Rand would be these sort of magnates, and but who actually, you know, are very hardworking people as well, right? And deserve what they have, all of the wealth that they have. Here we have the heroes, the shock workers, right? Who really, when I spoke to the people in Magnitogorsk, they use this word like about the working of the factory. Люди жгут тело, like people are burning their own bodies at this near these, you know, blast furnaces or open furnaces, because it's, I mean, imagine it's a horrible, I mean, you're near this horrible, like this like hundreds degrees fires, right? And you are working and you are sort of tolerating all of this. It's a really hard work, and you are building all of this, and it's a different kind of labor, right, from what we are doing. So it's even difficult for us to imagine, right? We kind of to be in this kind of near this kind of furnace, right? And it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. Even, I mean, like, I think he mentions that when the furnace like broke, there were several workers. Like if you fall into this when it's melting, and so it's just like you are gone, right? It's you're burnt alive and melted into this. So it's a very it's a distinct quality of labor, right, that made these things possible. And maybe it's difficult for us to like sort of even nowadays experience it, but maybe we can imagine, yeah, how difficult it was. So the rooting of the Soviet modernity in Western industrial modernity is a very important point. And it's sort of, it's shown through, it's a general ideology, sort of high modernism, like what counts as sort of the high value is placed on these people, right? And suddenly, if previously, like maybe Cossacks, the people who defended empire, were of high value, right, for the Russian Empire, or other heroes, now this person who is working at this furnace is a hero, right? A new hero. And of course, in the day industrialized age, in our age, these people are no longer heroic, right? And there is devaluation of their sort of labor and their heroism and so on, and they turn into quote unquote bydla, right? That they are, you know, people who are undisciplined, who drink, who have no opportunities, and so, and it's common, not only, it's common in post-Soviet SS, right? It's also common in the US, I imagine, where like this, what it's called Rust Belt, right? And all of these people from all of these small towns, which used to be working and earning, you know, like good wages, suddenly they turn into quote unquote rednecks, which is completely, used to be a different peasant category, but this sort of the people whose physical labor, this hard industrial labor, used to be of value, when it's no longer, when it becomes just a manual labor, low paid, like what happens. So sort of this high industrial modernity and then deindustrialization, it's a common, right? It's sort of a general trend that we are going to discuss a lot in this class. But also competition, right? Then between the bringing of the engineers, the bringing of the German architect, then the workers, surprised how many workers, like American workers, were working in 1932, like 70 American workers were working at this place, and they came to the Soviet Union from the US. I imagine maybe it's connected with depression in the US. Maybe they were idealists, some of them, right? Who were, he says that some of them were returning migrants, like people who migrated early and were returning. German workers, including Erich Honecker, right, who worked in Magnitogorsk as also a communist worker who came to work, maybe also connected with the depression, which was in Germany, right, before Hitler came to power. So the use of all of these people, right, and this then what it's called then overtake. Catch and overtake. What's the Russian for catch and overtake?
Догнать и перегнать.
Догнать и перегнать. Yeah. So like on the one hand, they're borrowing their expertise, their skills, right? But on the other hand, Magnitogorsk has to become better than the steel factory in Chicago, than steel factory in Pittsburgh, right? And Magnitogorsk is actually, it's showing the miracles, because while American and German factories are depressed during the Depression, right? Magnitogorsk is working, so we have to realize that people were, while, like the West is, what's the word, загнивает, is slowly rotting, and it's a depression time. Magnitogorsk is producing pig iron, steel, and what other? Steel rolls, right? Stali prakat, and so on. All of these words, yeah, it's I had to learn them because I don't know them in Russian. I don't understand. Well, I understand the difference between the pig iron and steel, and sort of raw iron and so on. But sometimes and in terms of furnaces and such, I have to learn like the difference between the blast furnace, like open furnace and such. So maybe some of you know better, but I imagine like in our walk of life, we are not very well familiar with, but maybe we should be because that's how things are produced. And we're sort of in our post-industrial age, there is this very sharp division, right, between the production and consumption, and we are just only a consumer society. We don't know how things are produced and how what it takes to produce things. And then the borrowing of expertise, the borrowing of skills, and then the competition between the Soviet modernity and Western modernity, and the belief that existed in the 30s, and it was not just a blind faith, right, the ideal, but it was clear that the Soviet modernity is working and working. And I imagine it was clear immediately after the World War II that was a right course of development, right, to develop these factories in the Urals, right, in the hinterland rather than somewhere in the Western peripheries like Ukraine, right, which are vulnerable to and would fall immediately after the occupation. What other questions? Now maybe let's open this for discussion and go through the list of questions, and you will have an opportunity to contribute as well. Let me stop recording.